What kind of company has 5 locations, and not one of them can keep a bus driver for more than 6 months? Leland Stokes stared at the resignation email on his office screen. It was the third driver from the same district to quit in less than a year. All 5 of his transportation hubs were supposed to offer late-night routes for factory workers and night shift staff across the city. But complaints were piling up: missed pickups, drivers asleep at the wheel, buses breaking down. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the corners of his eyes. He'd inherited the company from his father 3 years ago. It had grown too fast. Leland focused on contracts, expansion, and compliance, trusting his managers to handle the day-to-day. But now he wasn't so sure. He didn't know the employees personally. Most of them didn't even know what he looked like. The company had recently switched uniforms and updated ID cards, and he hadn't visited the district in over a year. Nobody would recognize him now. So he made a choice. The next night, dressed in a navy hoodie, khakis, and a worn baseball cap, Leland stepped into the downtown depot. He carried a satchel with a notepad, a water bottle, and a fake employee badge that read Leo Stevens. He'd already sent an internal request through HR to schedule a new hire named Leo as a night shift trainee for the week. The plan was simple: ride the late routes, observe, listen, and keep quiet. The depot was quiet when he arrived. The evening manager, a tall guy with a loud voice and glazed-over eyes, barely looked up from his clipboard. "You Leo?" the manager asked. "Yeah," Leland said, keeping his voice low.
"All right.
Don't expect much. We're short-staffed as usual. You'll shadow driver 7 tonight. That's Frank. He does the whole loop: west side, midtown, then east factory. He's supposed to clock out at 2 a.m., but don't be surprised if it's later."
"Got it."
"Anything I should know?" "Don't fall asleep. And keep your mouth shut if anyone complains. Just observe. This ain't your show." Leland nodded, biting his tongue. He found Frank outside by bus 7, tying down a loose storage latch. The man looked to be in his early 50s, face weathered, shoulders hunched. His uniform was clean but faded, like it had seen hundreds of washes. "You're my tag-along tonight?" Frank asked, not unkindly.
"Yeah, I'm Leo."
"All right.
Hop in.
Just don't slow me down." Leland climbed in and sat behind the driver's seat. The inside smelled faintly of diesel and old coffee. As the bus pulled out, Frank's hands gripped the wheel tight, eyes locked on the road like he had to will the machine forward. By their second stop, Leland noticed Frank's hands were trembling slightly. "You good?" he asked. Frank didn't answer for a moment. Then he muttered, "Did a double shift yesterday. Only got 4 hours sleep. But if I call out, nobody covers. So here I am." Leland frowned. "Why not skip the shift?" Frank gave a dry laugh. "Skip and lose hours? I've got a daughter in college. Rent's gone up. Besides, they already cut my overtime last month." Leland didn't say anything, but something tightened in his chest. Over the next few hours, Leland watched Frank take deep breaths at red lights, rub his eyes at longer stops. He never complained. He smiled at every passenger, helped an older woman with her walker, and even waited an extra minute for a young kid running to the curb. But by 1 a.m., Frank's voice was hoarse, and his foot slipped slightly on the brake pedal. "You need a break," Leland said quietly. "No time," Frank replied. 2 more stops." Leland looked around. The bus was empty. "Pull over." Frank glanced at him. "What?" "Pull over. I've driven buses before. I'll handle the rest of the loop." Frank blinked. "You serious?"
"Yeah. Get some rest."
"I'm not letting you pass out behind the wheel." Frank stared at him for a long second, then finally pulled over near a quiet curb. He climbed into a back seat and leaned his head against the window without a word. Leland slid into the driver's seat. His hands gripped the wheel, the engine rumbled underfoot, and suddenly, he wasn't a CEO anymore. He was just a guy driving a bus at 1 in the morning. And it felt real. 2 hours later, Leland parked bus 7 back at the depot. Frank was still asleep in the back. He didn't wake him. Inside the depot, the night manager was gone, probably clocked out early. The staff room was empty. Leland sat down at the metal table, pulled out his notepad, and began writing everything down: names, times, conditions, what he saw, what he felt. He stared at the clock above the door. It was 4:22 a.m. He was wide awake. Tomorrow, he would ride another route.
He needed to see all 5.
Leland kept riding. For 5 nights straight, he switched routes, rotating between depots without alerting any of his regional managers. Each shift began at dusk and bled into the early morning, and each one told him something different, none of it good. On the 3rd night, he boarded the East Factory Loop under a different alias and found himself on a bus that smelled faintly of mildew. The driver, a woman named Cynthia, had duct tape wrapped around the seatbelt latch and drove with a slight limp. She didn't speak much, but when Leland asked if the tape was standard issue, she replied with a bitter laugh and said, "You want something fixed around here, you better bring your own tools." By the time he reached the 5th night, he was running on adrenaline and cold coffee. The last route was in the Southside District, the only depot managed by someone who had been with the company since Leland's father ran it. That made him curious. The shift supervisor's name was Darrell Phelps, a man with a reputation for keeping it tight, according to the few internal memos Leland skimmed before going undercover. He arrived early, just after 6 in the evening, and found the depot already buzzing. Drivers were lining up for assignments, radios crackling, dispatchers flipping through route logs. It was the most organized location he'd seen all week. But something felt off. Leland approached the dispatch counter and gave his fake name this time, Mason, and waited. A woman in her 20s, wearing a headset and typing fast, barely glanced at him. "You're the fill-in?" she asked.
Yeah.
"All right. You're with bus 12. That's Marcus. He's running the Ridgeview Loop tonight." She didn't offer a greeting or a map, just pointed vaguely toward the back lot. Leland walked out, scanning the row of parked buses until he spotted a man leaning against the hood of a vehicle, arms crossed, staring down at his phone. "You Marcus?" Leland asked. The man looked up slowly. He was tall, early 30s, with a clean uniform and a sharp jawline. His eyes didn't hide the irritation. "You the new ride-along?"
Yeah.
Marcus didn't respond. He just turned, climbed into the bus, and started the ignition. The ride began without a word. The route took them through a newly developed suburban area with wide streets and minimal traffic. At first glance, everything seemed smooth. The bus was cleaner than any of the others Leland had been on, and the air conditioning actually worked. But it didn't take long to notice the tone Marcus used with passengers. When an elderly man boarded with a cane and asked if the route still stopped at Crescent Market, Marcus snapped, "It's the same route it's been for 5 years. Read the sign." Later, a woman with 2 children struggled to get her stroller through the doors. Marcus waited maybe 5 seconds before barking, "You're holding up my schedule. Move it or wait for the next one." Leland kept his mouth shut, but his jaw clenched tighter with each stop. By the time they hit the 3rd hour, Leland couldn't stay silent anymore. "You always talk to riders like that?" he asked from behind the driver's seat. Marcus didn't look at him. "They know what this is. I'm not babysitting people. This isn't customer service. It's public transport." Leland leaned forward. "You think that gives you the right to treat people like an inconvenience? What's your deal?" Marcus said, glancing at him in the rear view. "You're here to learn, not judge. I keep this bus on time, I don't call out, and I don't crash into light poles. That's more than I can say for half the clowns around here." Leland locked eyes with him. "That doesn't excuse disrespect. You don't get paid extra to be rude." Marcus scoffed. "You got no clue how this place works. People walk all over you if you let 'em. Management doesn't care long as the bus rolls in on time. So no, I don't coddle anyone. They'll survive." Leland didn't reply, but he made a note. He rode the rest of the shift in silence, watching Marcus slam the door shut half a second before a teenager could reach it and ignore a woman waving from the sidewalk. Back at the depot, the night manager was seated in the office, flipping through a schedule sheet. He wore a pressed shirt and had a Bluetooth earpiece clipped to his collar. Leland recognized him instantly from an old company banquet. Daryl Phelps. Daryl looked up as Marcus walked in. "Any issues?" he asked. "Nope," Marcus said, already moving toward the locker room. Leland lingered. "Hey," Daryl said, glancing at him. "You're the new guy, right? Mason?"
Yeah.
"Can I talk to you for a minute?" Daryl raised an eyebrow, but gestured toward the office. Leland followed him inside and shut the door. "What's on your mind?" "I just finished a route with Marcus. Guy's punctual, I'll give him that. But he treats riders like they're trash." Daryl leaned back. "He's been our most reliable driver for over a year. He doesn't call out, doesn't miss stops. That's rare around here. That doesn't justify how he talks to people." Daryl's expression flattened. "You're new. You don't know the pressure we're under. We've had 3 drivers quit in the last month and corporate doesn't send replacements. You know what happens when someone's late to work because a driver waited too long at a stop? We hear about it. From HR. From city contractors. So, yeah, I run a tight ship. And Marcus keeps the ship on course." Leland nodded slowly. "I'm curious," he said. "When's the last time you rode one of these buses?" "I've got enough to handle without joyriding," Daryl said. "I trust my team." Leland stared at him for a long second. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll ride with Marcus yourself. Sit in the front row. Watch how people react to him. And if you still think he's your best driver, I'll take your word for it." Daryl looked annoyed. "That's not your call to make." Leland pulled off his cap. "It is now." The color drained from Daryl's face as he stared at Leland's face recognition setting in. "Mr. Stokes, I've been riding these routes all week. Frank, Cynthia,
Ramon.
I've seen buses that should have been retired 5 years ago. I've seen dispatchers ignore safety reports. And I've seen good people exhausted, undersupported doing 3 jobs while people like Marcus treat customers like they're beneath him." Daryl opened his mouth, but Leland raised a hand. "I'm not interested in excuses. I want accountability." Effective immediately, Marcus is suspended while we review passenger complaints from the last 60 days. If even half of what I saw tonight shows up in those reports, he's done. Daryl nodded stiffly. "As for you," Leland continued, "you'll spend the next week on the buses every night. You'll rotate with different drivers and ride every loop. If you're going to run this depot, you need to understand what these people go through." "Yes, sir." Leland walked out of the office without another word. He passed Marcus on the way to the locker room. The driver gave him a confused look, then froze as realization took hold. Your supervisor will fill you in." Leland didn't wait to hear the rest. He had one more depot to check tomorrow, and a list of problems that could no longer be ignored. This wasn't about optics anymore.
It was about who deserved to stay.
And who had already failed. Leland arrived at the final depot just after 5 p.m., before the sun dipped beneath the skyline. This one sat on the northern edge of the city, older than the others, smaller, with a cracked parking lot and a faded sign that still bore the company's original logo from 2 decades ago. It was the only location that hadn't been remodeled after the last round of capital improvements, and it showed. He entered wearing a gray windbreaker, jeans, and a plain black cap. The front office was dimly lit, and the floor had streaks of dried mud from the morning shift. A woman at the front desk, her shoulders hunched, looked up from a stack of laminated route maps. "Name?" she asked. "Anthony." She typed slowly with one finger. "New trainee?"
Yeah.
"Night shift."
All right.
"You'll ride with Devin. Bus 21. He parks around the far lot." Leland noticed her hands. They were rough, with bandages on 2 knuckles. She wasn't a desk worker by trade, probably pulling double duty. He didn't ask. Outside, the far lot sloped slightly downhill, and bus 21 was already idling. A man in his early 40s stood beside it, arms folded, eyes narrowed like he was calculating something. He wore a reflective vest over his uniform and had a clipboard tucked under one arm. "You Anthony?" he asked.
Yeah. I'm Devon.
"You're just observing tonight, right?" "Correct." Devon nodded once.
Good.
"Just stay clear of the front. I don't need distractions." Leland stepped on quietly and took a seat halfway down. The bus interior was tidy, although the ceiling panels had water stains. Devon's driving was sharp, his turns clean, his braking smooth. But the silence was thick. He didn't greet passengers, didn't glance at them. He kept his hands at 10 and 2 and never looked away from the road. At the second stop, a man in a janitor's uniform stepped on and asked if the bus could wait an extra minute. His coworker was coming down the ramp behind him. "No," Devon said flatly. "Next stop scheduled in 6 minutes. He can catch the next one." The doors hissed shut before the coworker reached the curb. At the next intersection, a woman asked if the route still went past Westhill Medical. Devon didn't answer. She repeated the question louder. "Yes," he said, without turning. "Stop asking." Leland kept his eyes on the mirror. The woman looked down, embarrassed. When they pulled into the third stop, a group of teenagers climbed on and joked loudly. They weren't disruptive, just energetic. One of them tripped slightly, bumping into a pole. "Sit down and shut it," Devon snapped. "You're not in a cafeteria." The entire group quieted instantly. Leland waited until they hit a long stretch of road between stops. Then he walked up and stood near the front. "You've been doing this a while?" he asked. 17 years, Devon replied.
Why?
How do you think it's going?" Devon didn't look away from the windshield. "Nobody missed their stop." "That's not what I asked." Devon exhaled through his nose. "I do my job. I don't babysit." "You got a problem?" "I've got questions," Leland said. "Like, when did it become normal to talk to people like they're burdens?" Devon's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "You think people care about nice words? They care about getting to work. On time. I give them that." "You think that's all they deserve?" Devon finally glanced at him. "You don't keep a route alive 17 years by holding hands. You keep it alive by not crashing and not quitting." Leland stepped back without responding. He returned to his seat and watched the rest of the route in silence. They finished just after midnight. Devon didn't speak again until the doors folded open back at the depot. "You can file whatever you want," he said quietly. "I know how this works. I've seen 3 supervisors come and go. Nothing changes." Leland didn't reply. Inside the depot office, the night lead was asleep at her desk, head resting on a folded jacket. A dispatch screen blinked behind her. Leland walked past without waking her and entered the back records room. He logged into the central system using an admin code he hadn't touched in over a year. He pulled Devon's rider complaint history. There were 32 entries over the past 14 months. Most were marked as unsubstantiated, but the notes told the real story: riders afraid to speak up, others changing buses to avoid him, one incident of a disabled passenger left behind at a non-wheelchair accessible stop. Leland printed every entry. He then checked the depot's staffing logs. 8 drivers were scheduled for night routes. 2 had been on mandatory overtime for 6 consecutive weeks. The depot manager, according to the schedule, hadn't worked a weekend in 2 months. He left the records room and walked back to the main floor. The sleeping lead still hadn't stirred. He picked up the depot phone and called the company's HR director directly. She answered after 2 rings, her voice alert despite the hour. "It's Leland," he said. "I need you to place a supervisor on temporary assignment to North Depot starting tomorrow night. And schedule a full audit on their complaint handling process." There was a pause. "Understood." What triggered this? Systemic failure. And one driver who ran out of grace a long time ago. By 6 a.m., Devon was called into the office and handed a formal termination letter. Leland didn't do it himself. He wanted the process to be standard, professional. But he left a note attached to the envelope, handwritten. 17 years is a long time. That should have meant something more. The next night, Leland returned, this time without a disguise. He walked through the depot in a clean button-down and introduced himself to every night staffer one by one. Some looked stunned. Others avoided eye contact. But he stayed until every route launched, watching from the loading bay. Then he sat with a new supervisor on rotation, a woman named Kiana brought in from the West Side Depot. She was sharp-eyed, soft-spoken, and asked every driver how their vehicle was performing before they left the lot. "You think they'll trust me?" she asked him quietly. "They won't trust a title," Leland said. "But they'll trust consistency. Show up. Every night. Listen more than you talk." He paused. "That's what I should have done a long time ago." Kiana nodded and returned to her checklist. Leland stayed until sunrise. He didn't ride a bus that night. He just watched the depot breathe, buses in, buses out, tired drivers clocking off, dispatchers coordinating handoffs with quiet urgency. He finally left when the morning shift arrived. As he stepped into his car, his phone buzzed with a message from HR. The audit was scheduled. Anonymous feedback forms had already been distributed. 2 drivers from North Depot had reached out voluntarily to report long-standing issues. It wasn't fixed.
Not yet.
But it was moving. And for the first time in months, Leland felt like the company was no longer running without him. He was back behind the wheel. Leland waited a full month before returning to the Southside Depot.
Not undercover this time.
No disguises, no aliases, just himself, walking in through the front doors at 10 minutes past 4 in the afternoon. The air felt different, less tense. The dispatch room had been reorganized, new scheduling software installed, and a second-night dispatcher was now on rotation. The woman from that first night, the one who barely looked up, was gone. She'd resigned 2 weeks after the internal review began, citing personal conflict with operational changes. Leland hadn't needed to ask further. He stepped into the supervisor's office and found Daryl sitting behind the desk, a slim binder open in front of him. There were new route feedback summaries inside, handwritten by drivers. Leland recognized the forms. They were part of the reforms he'd ordered rolled out across all locations. Daryl stood when he noticed him. "You've been busy," Leland said.
"I've been learning," Daryl replied.
"Turns out if you actually ride with your team, they tell you things you'd never hear from a clipboard." Leland sat across from him. "You ready for the staffing results?" Daryl hesitated. "Go ahead." 3 complaints confirmed against Marcus, 2 verbal misconduct, 1 incident caught on security footage. You were right about his punctuality. But you let that blind you. I know. You'll stay on. But from now on, your performance will be evaluated by how your team performs, not just your numbers. If your drivers are exhausted, disrespectful, or ignored, it's on you. I understand. Leland nodded once, then stood. "Come with me." They walked out to the yard, where buses were being prepped for the night shift. One of the drivers, Frank, was standing beside bus 7, talking to a younger man who looked barely out of high school. "That's Corey," Daryl said quietly. "New hire. Frank brought him in. Said he reminded him of his nephew." Leland approached them. "How's the ankle, Frank?" he asked. Frank turned, surprised. "Better. Physical therapy's helping." "You back to full shifts?"
"Close.
4 nights a week for now." Leland pulled a folded envelope from his coat pocket. "That's for your daughter's tuition. Company scholarship. You didn't ask for it, but you earned it." Frank inhaled, eyes wide. "You didn't have to, I did," Leland said. "Because we failed you before. We don't intend to again." Frank didn't speak, just gripped the envelope with both hands. Corey stepped forward. "You're the guy who drove that night, right?" When Frank almost nodded off. Leland smiled faintly. "That's me." Corey nodded.
He told me about it.
That's why I took the job. Figured if a company's CEO can drive a bus at 2 a.m., maybe it's worth showing up for. Just make sure you show up for the riders too, Leland said. They'll remember how you treat them long after they forget what time you arrive. As they walked back toward the building, Daryl asked, "You doing this at all the locations?" "Already started," Leland said. "We've got new supervisors rotating through each depot for cross-training. I'm requiring that every one of them logs 20 hours on the buses every quarter. No exceptions. Even West Side? Especially West Side." Inside the break room, a whiteboard displayed the new schedule. No more back-to-back double shifts. Each route now had a built-in floating relief slot to allow drivers a 10-minute breather per loop. It hadn't been easy. They'd had to reduce 2 non-essential midday runs and delay a low-traffic segment, but the shift balance was finally sustainable. Leaning against the wall near the vending machines was Cynthia, the driver with the duct-tape seatbelt. She was sipping coffee, her hair tied back in a bandana. The seatbelt had been replaced, and her bus had received a full mechanical overhaul. Leland approached her. "How's the new rib?" "It turns without creaking." "Didn't know that was possible." He smiled. "We reviewed all vehicle maintenance logs. Your depot had the worst backlog in the city. That's been corrected." "You really weren't kidding about fixing things," she said. "I can't undo the months you had to bring your own tape. But I can make sure no one else has to." She tilted her head. "You still driving?" "Not lately."
"Shame," she said.
"You weren't half bad." Leland glanced around the room. For other drivers were gathered near the table, joking quietly, their shoulders relaxed. The atmosphere had shifted, not perfect, not effortless, but no longer strained. The HR director entered a moment later and handed Leland a printed report. He scanned it quickly. "Employee turnover down 28% since last month," he said. "Complaint resolution time down 60%. And customer satisfaction surveys are trending upward." "Still a long road ahead," she added. "There always will be," Leland said. "But at least now we're facing it." That evening, Leland returned to headquarters and called a meeting with his senior executives. Not in the boardroom, but in the training center's same folding chairs, same industrial coffee dispenser the drivers used. He stood at the front of the room with a stack of photos, snapshots taken from his undercover nights, Frank helping a rider with a walker, Cynthia adjusting her side mirror with gloved hands, Marcus slamming a door shut while a teenager stood outside with raised arms. He held each photo up one by one. "This is where our company lives," he said. "Not in spreadsheets or contracts. In the cabs, on the curbs, in the faces of the people who wait for us to show up and the people we ask to carry them safely. If we don't honor that every night, every route, then we don't deserve to lead anything." The room was quiet. "I want every executive in this company to log 10 hours on our buses before the next quarter. No observers. No special treatment. You'll ride, you'll listen, and you'll learn." One executive raised a hand. "Is this a one-time thing?" "No," Leland said. "It's the new normal." The next morning, as dawn broke over the city, Leland stood on the curb outside a depot, waiting beside a rider in a nurse's uniform sipping tea from a thermos. A bus pulled up, headlights low, brakes hissing gently. The driver smiled and nodded as the doors opened. Leland stepped aboard, not as the CEO, not undercover, just as a passenger. He tapped his fare card, nodded to the driver, and took a seat near the back. The engine rumbled, the bus pulled away, and the city rolled by.
No speeches. No spotlight.
Just motion. And the quiet hum of a system slowly being rebuilt one night, one route, one decision at a time.